Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where I talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of The Flash, as well as the latest episode of Legends of Tomorrow. Like always, if I'm talking about something you want to listen to, you can always look in the description down below. I include the time when I start talking about each of the respective shows. So for example, if you don't want to hear what I had to say about this week's episode of The Flash, you can skip to what I had to say about this week's episode of Legends of Tomorrow. But the first thing we're going to talk about is this week's episode of The Flash. So in this episode, we have Barry traveling into the Speed Force. Again, this time as a means of rescuing Wally. What I really like is just that speedster thing of just like that opening, and you have Barry standing there, and it has that moment like everyone's frozen just because Barry's just, using his speed, and just like for a speedster, just like time moves differently. Their perception of time is differently. So everyone's kind of frozen there because it's like you see Barry just kind of contemplating everything, just because everything's kind of rushing through his mind while the world's kind of slowly moving around. So it was a perfect image, and I thought it was like very well done, just the way the camera's moving around, showing you, and everyone's like frozen like that. So that was kind of pretty neat. But Barry goes into the Speed Force again, which Barry has a very different encounter with the Speed Force this time. At first, obviously the Speed Force disguised itself as many different people. First off, disguising itself as Eddie, then eventually Ronnie. Because it's trying to show, because the Speed Force isn't all that happy about what Barry did, creating Flashpoint. It's like, dude, we gave you your powers back because you promised us that you would be okay with your mom dying. And then we give your powers back, and what's the next thing you do? Yes, you defeated Zoom, but then you went off and created Flashpoint, basically destroying or at very least cracking the timeline. Like, dude, and there's been vast ramifications for you doing that, because in a way you doing that led to Savitar getting released. But no, for Barry, he's kind of like, the fact is that he was okay with it, but then his dad died, and they're like, yeah, we know that, and we saw that you were about to create Flashpoint. We could have stopped you, but we didn't, because it's like, there are consequences to every action. So basically, you have to live your consequences. Same thing about Wally. He's locked up right now because what he did led to him being here. And it was a very interesting thing. It's the fact is that obviously, like, the Speed Force is trying to show Barry as like, these are all these different people, Eddie and Ronnie, people who sacrifice themselves, mainly for your sake, essentially, to stop these bad situations from happening. Obviously, to stop Eobard, as well as, to stop the wormhole that had opened up at the end of season 1. They had all sacrificed themselves, but the fact is like, the Speed Force is trying to make them see like, oh, these are the lives they could have led. Like, take Eddie, for example. Eddie would have been with Iris. He would have married Iris. Joe would have been, like, his father-in-law. Then take Ronnie and Caitlin. The fact is they could have been together. They could have had a family. But the fact of the matter is that's no longer an option because they sacrificed themselves. Because you have one side of it, Barry being like, he understands, because the fact of the matter is he kind of like has been pushing his burden off. Like, this stuff, yes, you can share your burden, but you can't push it off on other people. Like, for example, what he did with Wally. It was not his job to push off saving Iris on Wally, because that's one of the contributing factors that led to this, because Wally was so scared that he was going to let down his sister. He's going to let everyone down, that it just, allowed Savitar to get inside of his head, because, he was scared. Like Barry brought up last episode, fear is the reason why all of this played out the way it did. But it's like a situation of like, Barry has to be the one to save Iris. It's not up to him to like pass that on to someone else. He has to take responsibility for all this, essentially. Because obviously the Speed Force was like, okay, Barry, you came in here for an ulterior motive, didn't? It's like, no, I only came here to save Wally. I was like, no, because I feel like it's Barry going to try and attempt to fix everything, which I guess he knows he can't fix everything, because as we've already had that conversation with Jay, he can't go back in time and try to undo the damage that's done by Flashpoint, because all that would do is create even more problems. Because it's like, yeah, you solve one solution by going back in time, but you create 1,000 more, and it's like you'll never be. And every time he goes back in time, he just end up destroying the timeline and just essentially space-time continuum. I'm not sure if that'd be the exact phrasing necessary for this example, but still, it just messed things up. So also, I appreciate the fact is it took on the form of Captain Cold, Snart too. And it's like, do you know why he sacrificed himself, Barry? It's because you inspired him. You made him he wanted to be a hero, just like you. Because what I find it fascinating, as I brought up before, and it seems like it still continues, is the fact is that the Speed Force seems to be very indifferent. It's like, yes, there are bad guys, there are good guys, but it's not a situation where they necessarily get involved unless absolutely necessary, unless the person that's coming to them absolutely needs them. Because like I said, we've never actually met any of the bad guys meeting the Speed Force. So far, the only people I've met who have come into the Speed Force obviously is Wally, Barry, and Jay, but like we've never seen like Eobard or Zolomon or Savitar interacting with the Speed Force. But like I said, like to me, the image was always like the Speed Force is this omnipotent thing that just is always watchful, but it doesn't interfere because it's kind of like just let humans do their thing. It's kind of the mentality I've had. But it seems like they're so invested in Barry. I guess it's because they realize his destiny. Like Barry doesn't know just how big of a destiny he has, but you know, Speed Force does. Because like when Snart was attacking Jay and like Barry defended him, was like, no, I'm not gonna. You can try and stop me if you want me to, but I'm not gonna stop. I'm gonna get Wally out here, whatever it takes, even if I have to go through you. And you see, as he's about to go towards Wally, you see a smirk come across Snart's face. There's a part of me that's like, I think the Speed Force I think it's taken an interest in Barry because they find Barry fascinating. I guess, you know, because the Speed Force is this thing and because it is omnipotent, I'm sure it can see the past, present, and future. So it sees what Barry is eventually going to do and it knows the potential he has. And it's like, you know, like they have an invested interest in him. To what degree, I don't know. And that's what I find so fascinating. Because I don't even think Barry sees it either, that the Speed Force is investing in him. The reason why it's so disappointed is because it seemed like it wanted to get Barry to kind of snap out of his funk. So that's why it's like, hey, we're showing you all these things that happen. It's like the fact is you have to face up the fact is this is what happened, but all you can do is move forward and try to fix things the best. You can't now always fix things. All you can do is try your best to move forward and build a better future, essentially. It does kind of have obviously a sad twist to it because Jay ends up sacrificing himself for Wally because it's like, there has to be someone there to take Wally's place. And, you know, Barry originally wanted it to be him because it's like, yeah, this is all my fault anyway. Everything that's transpired happened because of me. So he's going to be the one to take Wally's place because he's like, oh, Wally has to be the one to save Iris. But then going back to the point I'm making, like the Speed Force is like, you can't tell us one thing, Barry, and then go around and contradict yourself. It's like, you talking about the fact is that you're not going to pass this burden off to Wally, but now you're saying you're going to sacrifice yourself so you can make sure that Wally is the one there to be able to save Iris because Barry's just kind of like, I can't do it. So... But you have Jay staying by. And what's very interesting about the whole quote-unquote hell situation, whatever, I'm very curious to understand what that place is because Barry sealed Savitar. And it's like, what did he do did he like create? I mean, it seems like a prison that he created. I mean, but how he went about creating it, I mean, what it's made of, guess we'll eventually know at some point. But what's really interesting is basically it's a hell that basically traps you in the moment that... In Wally's case, the moment his mom died, because he wasn't really there for her during that time, and he regrets that, you know, as one of his biggest regrets. So it's basically making you face that, because Barry's like, yeah, if he were to face it, he lives with it every day, and it's the thought of losing Iris. That would be his biggest regret. But then you have the Speed Force being like, oh, the fact of the matter is you haven't seen hell yet. So I think it's a situation of like the Speed Force knows that like there's a lot more that you should be more aware of. Like you might think it is one thing, but your hell might be something else entirely. So... What I'm very interested in is like to know what Jay's hell is because, you know, obviously he's seeing something because you can't see what the other person, like the person that's there sees. Only that particular speedster can see it. It also makes you wonder, what did Savitar see? I mean, whatever it was enough to drive him crazy. Like he brought up multiple times, like he went insane and then like clawed his way back to sanity just from sheer will alone. But it's like, that blew my, like, it's such a crazy thing. Like, and that things kind of played out that way. And there's even a situation, because Barry and Iris are kind of at odds, because Iris loves him and everything, but it's just like she doesn't know how to feel because it's all too much to handle. It's like, first she's got to worry about her future. Then she finds out that, oh, like Barry proposing to her, moving in with her, all has been for the sake of trying to change the future. Like we brought up last episode, and she even said to herself again this episode, it's a situation of she didn't know if Barry really loved her, but now she knows he loves her, and it's just like she wants to marry him out of love and be married out of love, not just out of some need to save him, because she understands the fact of the matter is he's like, after everything Barry's lost, he can't imagine losing anyone else, especially Iris, and it's like it would break him. So this whole needing to save her has consumed him, and it's like anyone else would be consumed by it too. So, but then it leads to a conversation where Barry's like, we should take a break, because he's basically saying we won't do good for each other in this particular situation, because it's like, even in this situation, I do love you, but the fact of the matter is every move I make at this point would all be about saving you. And so I think it's a situation, one way you can look at it, I think, is that Barry could look at it as like, how can I really distinguish what's me just being there, being the man that loves you, and which is the other side of which parts are just me being the man trying to protect you, because in this particular situation, you can't necessarily be both, because there's contradictions. Like, one side is just dedicated. Yes, the protection is there out of a need, out of love, but it's more like everything he does is a calculated move. Like, proposing to her was a calculated move. It wasn't like an emotional thing like, oh, I love you so much, Iris, I want to marry you. But even Barry admitted, he was like, yeah, I realize now that I did that just to save you. That wasn't out of the kindness of, like, my love for you. So basically saying, like, we should take a break, because, like, if I continue this way, all I'm gonna do is be with you, very dishonest with you. Like, it won't be like loving you and being your husband out of love. It'd just be out of fear of losing you and wanting to protect you. Which I'm also wondering, could this also be from the fact of what he experienced in the Speed Force? Seeing what everyone else's lives could be? Could it be that Barry's like pushing his own happiness away because he thinks he doesn't deserve it? It's just his own way of punishing himself. It's like, the fact is that Jay's in this situation he's in, like he plays such a role in it, and it's like seeing what everyone's lives could have been if it wasn't for him. So I think it's a situation of like, maybe that might be the role. I don't know. Like, it might be a situation where Barry's kind of misinterpreting what the Speed Force was trying to tell him. Or maybe he's doing exactly what the Speed Force was kind of advising him to do. I don't know. Like, that was just kind of what I saw. I mean, I'd love to know what your thoughts about it is, like how you saw that. Like, what was your perception of it? But to me, it seemed more like, at least that's what I was thinking, that it was more so because he saw the happiness that other people won't have because of his action. So it's like, why should I be happy when no one else is? So, but I mean, more so than anything, it is to focus on saving Iris. And once he does that, maybe he can go back to kind of repairing what's there between them. And what's also very fascinating is the fact is that Zoom thing, whatever it is, because it's not 100% Hunter's element anymore, came and attacked him in the Speed Force. I'm guessing, like, it really didn't click in my head that it was necessarily a time wraith. I knew it kind of served the same purpose, but it never really clicked in my head that that's exactly what it was. He became a time wraith. Like I said, I feel like there's another name for it. I forgot to ever look it back up, but it was kind of interesting how it activated the same way as a time wraith. That the moment it grabbed onto Barry, it started like aging him, sucking out his time in life. Granted, Barry was able to possibly destroy it. I don't know whether it's completely destroyed or not. I mean, the question is, can you even destroy anything in the Speed Force? Because the Speed Force is just energy and stuff. So could that fake Hunter Zolomon actually be put back together? Like, I mean, like I said, the Speed Force is like this omnipotent thing, this existence, this being. So it's like there's no telling exactly what it could do if it wanted to get involved. I mean, because that's also what I'm thinking about Savitar too. It's like, I would think the Speed Force would be able to do something. So going back to my whole point of like, it must not want to be interfere. It's like, I think it leans more sides to, like I said, because they have a vested interest in Barry. That's why I think they lean more to wanting to help Barry. But more so than anything, they just want to keep a balance. It's just, I mean, I would go as far as almost saying, like, you could probably compare the Speed Force to a god itself. It's not like a concrete thing. It takes on many forms in the form of things that you need to see to kind of teach you something. Like I said, I feel like it doesn't, I mean, granted, we don't even know what Jay's experience with the Speed Force has ever been like. I mean, the fact is, it talks about, it's like, oh, you've gotten slow in your age, Jay. Like, that's as far as that's going. But it's like, does the Speed Force interact with everyone else the way it does Barry? So that's a question. But because I'm also wondering, because I mean, obviously I'll be talking about it a little bit in the Legend ones, which obviously I'm doing this first. I haven't recorded that yet. But bringing up the question of like, if that thing is dead, I mean, because I was like, the fact is, Eobard still has to worry about his existence because things still play out the way they have. So like, even things on the Legends, things on the Flash have technically already happened or are in the process of happening. So I think that thing being destroyed here in the Speed Force doesn't matter because, like I said, I get the feeling like the Speed Force can probably reconstitute it bring it back. Maybe you could even look at it like this happened because when it attacked Eobard a couple episodes back, maybe this event in the Flash had already happened and it already brought it back. I don't know, just something to think about. The whole time travel and just time works differently inside of the Speed Force, I guess. So, but on the other side of things, we had Jessie dealing with the whole situation in her own way. She's wanting to chase down Savitar and kind of deal with him on her own, which you literally have everyone being like, no, that's a bad idea. I mean, it's literally no one has been able to stop Savitar. Like, Barry, last episode, barely landed some blows on him. That's the closest. Because even like 3 speedsters, like, I mean, granted, they haven't been in a position where they can all work together to deal with Savitar, but the fact of the matter is, Barry, even someone as experienced as Jay Garrick, wasn't enough to kind of deal with Savitar. And really quickly, I throw this note in there. It's something I meant to bring up earlier, but I kind of let slip my mind. It's got to suck on Barry's part. Not only is Jay stuck there, once again, kind of connected, at least in his mind, it's like, oh, this is all my fault. But it's got to suck even more because Jay has, looks like his dad. So it's like, it's almost like he's letting it, in his mind, he might be looking at it as like, oh, I'm letting my dad down again. So not only is it just a mentor and friend that he feels like he's abandoning, it's a man that looks like his father. So it's got to sting even more. So that was something I just thought was kind of interesting that I was thinking about that I kind of let slip my mind. But getting back to it, it's like they've been no match for this Savitar, but it's like Jesse's like, oh, you can take him on one-on-one. I mean, HR puts it best. It's like, yeah, he hurt someone that she loves, and she just can't sit around because she feels like she has to do something. I mean, there was a very messed up thing where HR was like, oh yeah, we're going to have to wait for the real Flash to get back. It's like, ooh, that was not the right thing to say, which just kind of pissed Jessie off even more and made her feel like she has to do something. But as expected, she can't do anything against Savitar. I mean, to be fair, none of them can. He's like super fast. He makes them all look like they're moving in slow motion. But the fact of the matter, what I thought was kind of interesting is when she threw a bolt of lightning and he ended up taking it and then throwing it right back at her. It was like, cause that's the first time we've ever really seen Savitar kind of use any of his powers. Like, obviously he's been fast before, but mainly it's just been like knocking people around with his like enhanced punches and stuff like that. He's never really activated any of his powers. I mean, to my knowledge, so. But there was a very interesting thing, like the reason why Jesse was able to get to him was because of the claw that, at least the blade from his armor that broke off, that allowed her to actually hurt him. I mean, it makes sense because it's like, it's from his armor, so it'd be able to pierce through, but then again, it's like, she probably found like an open spot, and then it clicked in everyone's head, it's like, oh, the fact is Jesse was able to hurt him means he's human, which I guess it makes sense because that's the only way they've seen Savitar, which I guess from our point of view is like we saw it when Jay originally brought up Savitar being the first speedster, possibly. Like, the fact of the matter is that like it never crossed their mind that like there's someone underneath that armor. They probably thought that that's who Savitar was, but the fact of the matter is we as an audience already know he was a man before that, but now they do. So it kind of brings him down because like before they thought they were fighting this omnipotent being, like, even though they don't want to believe he's a god, I'm sure on some level there was a fear inside of them to make him, like, I guess that also helps his case too, is like by the fact is that he is so powerful and so fast and going around claiming himself to be a god, that even if you don't want to believe it, maybe on some psychological level, it makes you think he is one. It makes you kind of doubt yourself. So I feel like that played a role. It's kind of what that role was to play. But now they realize he is human, that underneath that there is a man. Once again, I'm very curious about his identity. But, and why he does have such, I mean, obviously we trail back in, like, cause even Snart brought it up. It's like, yeah, that's why, Savitar hates you so much, because you had him locked up here for so long and basically had him be stuck in his own personal hell like that. It's just fascinating. So it's just kind of interesting because it never crossed my mind that they didn't realize that. And it's like, obviously you really wouldn't, like, and the only reason why we know that is because we saw that. Because if we had never saw that scene when Jay was talking about Savitar, I probably would have never thought so too. Which does make up the question, where the hell did he get that armor? Because even brought up the fact that they were studying the materials from it, like the blade and everything. It's like, we don't know where this thing is from. I mean, granted, he is from the distant future, so maybe it's a situation where he got the armor from the future. It's like, how did you get that? So very fascinating, very awesome episode. Obviously things are changing up in the sense of The fact is Jesse left because she's like, Earth 3 doesn't have a speedster, so she's going to go off to Earth 3 until Jay is brought back. Because she even had the point of being like, Savitar being like, he has plans for her. Which, as I brought up before, it sucks knowing certain things, because it's like, I don't know what they plan on doing with Jesse's character and what, in particular, what Savitar has planned for her. But it's like, I've brought it up before. I just hope Jesse's character in the show doesn't play out like her from the comic books. Like, I don't know whether it's all versions of her. I won't go into too much details. Things don't work out well for Jesse. I'm going to just put it like that. I mean, I don't know the exact circumstances behind it. This is all second-hand information. So it could be something that's, I heard like this, like, a long time ago. I think it was like, I'm pretty sure it was like last season when Jessie first popped up last season. I think that was a situation where like I started hearing stuff about her being a speedster and stuff like that. So I kind of already knew that ahead of time, but you get the point I'm trying to make. What I find it interesting though is like, oh, the fact is Earth 3 needs a speedster. What about Earth 2? Earth 2 doesn't have a speedster other than you. I mean, not to our knowledge. But once again, my thoughts about that was kind of like, well, Earth 2 has other heroes as well. The fact is that, as we know, that they exist in some shape or form. So they may not be the ones that we're familiar with here on Earth 1, but there's some form of them on Earth 2. So maybe she felt like they don't need her as much. Maybe it's like her dad's there, so that'll help out things a little bit. He'll be able to handle them. I don't know. I just thought that was just kind of interesting. It's like, so you're worried about another Earth that's not yours. So it's just something to nitpick around about. I just thought it was kind of interesting. I mean, granted, we don't really know much about Earth 3's heroes either. The only one we know about is Jay, so. Good episode, some interesting developments. It's definitely going to be interesting seeing where everything goes going forward, because you have like what's going to be going up with Wally, like readjusting to the new, I mean, since subsequently coming back from the Speed Force. You know, he's going to beat himself up because he's going to blame himself for Savitar being free in the first place. Now he doesn't also have Jesse. He doesn't have Jesse there with him either. So, I mean, they can always stay in contact. You know, she is like 2 Earths away, but still, it's not that big of an issue. But still, at this point in time, it's like, you know, then Barry's dealing with the whole him and Iris kind of taking a break thing, everything he's experienced in the Speed Force, and just living with his guilt about everything now. It's going to be very interesting going forward, especially considering what next week's episode is. I'll go ahead and spoil it. Because obviously I saw previews for it before I even saw this episode, because I saw previews of it last week or whatever, when I first saw it. But it's like a Supergirl Flash crossover again. Essentially, it's a musical. What I'm very curious about, will it have anything to do with, okay, Mixia Spitlick? I know I've mispronounced. I did a whole video about it today, which, I mean, it's kind of me spoiling it a little bit, because that might be going up this week. That might even end up going up next week. It's really not important. But nevertheless, I'm wondering if it had something to do with him. Most likely it doesn't. But I'm very interested to see where that kind of plays out in the whole storyline of like things, like how they get to that point. I'm very interested to see that all. And also, I'm just super excited because it's like, I for one, already love the Heroes versus Aliens crossover, but I really also like Barry and Kara, because Grant Gustin and Melissa Benoist have a very nice chemistry when it comes to the shows. I think they work together so well, and it's just so much fun them being on the screen together that I think it's going to be a blast seeing that. So I'm very interested. Not a big musical person. Like, I don't go out on my way to watch and listen to musicals, but I do appreciate them. I think the last quote unquote musical, at least TV show wise, that I ever watched was the Psych one that happened, which I really like that, which, I mean, I know I'm delving a little off a little bit. It's kind of interesting bringing this whole situation up, because a lot of this kind of has a lot to do with also Legends too, because Legends technically had a musical number, like not necessarily full blown, but also the fact of sacrifice and everything. But obviously I'll get to that, you know, when I get to Legends, which will literally be a second from now. So just want to say, like, you know, I'm very, very excited to see what goes down, like not just next episode, but also just going forward with The Flash. And now moving on to this week's episode of Legends of Tomorrow. A very good episode of Legends where we have the Legends essentially traveling to 1970 to talk to Commander Steel about getting the final piece of the the Spear of Destiny. It turns out he did a very ingenious thing, and that is he sent the last piece, it was inside the flagpole that is currently on the moon. So that was pretty ingenious of him. I also appreciate the fact is that when he came across Rip, he punched Rip in the face, and then it was like, oh yeah, he's like, oh, sorry about that, folks, because he works at NASA and stuff like that, and he's just like, oh, sorry about that, folks. He didn't have the proper credentials, and then everyone that was there literally grabbed their credentials and like holding those. Oh no, I got mine. Oh, don't worry about it. But now it's all about getting to space to try and get the last piece. Because Eobard, because I was wondering which one of them was going to be the one that goes there. Obviously, it makes sense that it would be Eobard. I was like, oh, how did he get on board? Like, where is he? And then the guy was sitting there, and he's like, sorry about that. He starts stabbing him like, oh, right. Disguising yourself as someone else. I don't know why I didn't see that coming. I did love the whole, like, him and Ray situation of them kind of fighting it out. And then it never clicked in my head. It's like, oh yeah, Speedster wouldn't be able to use their powers necessarily in zero gravity. Because I started thinking about it. I was like, well, what about the fact that Speedsters use their powers mid-air too, don't they? But then again, it's still a situation where it's a situation where they're already in an accelerated point. So I guess it's kind of like their body's already moving at an accelerated rate because they're off into the air, but at the very least there's still gravity to keep them grounded. So because it's like you can't really build up traction on nothing, so obviously he can't use his powers. I mean, but I was wondering, like, why didn't he like start doing the fast phasing with his hand, because that's his go-to move? But then I was like, maybe even then, like, you can't, when there's like nothingness, there's no gravity to keep your hand, like adding weight to your hand, like because your hand is weightless, there's no like, because he's able to vibrate his hand because he's moving against gravity. And it's like I said, I am not very scientific. I mean, I'm sure there's actually a very interesting scientific way to explain why he can't use his power, why Speedster wouldn't be able to use their powers in zero gravity. But at least the way I think about it is like there's nothing for your hand to be caught on. There's no gravity, so there's no way to create resistance or friction for your hand to bounce back and forth and move very fast. There's no gravity for your hands to kind of bounce off of. I mean, like I said, I know I'm probably looking like a complete idiot, but still, like I that's the best way I can possibly explain it. I know I'm like super 100% wrong, but it's still very fascinating because I never thought about that before. It's like, right, Speedsters shouldn't be able to use their powers when there's no gravity, but nevertheless, just there's so many good things about this episode. I'm trying to bounce all around. I love the fact is that we did kind of, speaking of Ray and Eobard, I love the fact is that there was a little bit of bonding between them, because it's a situation where it's like Eobard kind of like brings up the fact is like, oh, I'm a scientist, because like Ray's like, okay, I'm gonna get out there. Obviously, like the lander part of the shuttle got separated, got damaged on landing. So the fact is that, you know, he has to fix it so they can get back up and just make everything so that everyone on the ground thinks everything's okay. Because now it's like they had to cut off communications to make it so they wouldn't know that anything went wrong. But then Eobard's like, oh, you should do this, and that. He's like, dude, I'm a scientist from the future. And he also said some very interesting things about, he's like, oh, I love working with you, Ray. Because the fact of the matter is that it's been a while since I worked with someone smart, you know, very scientific angle, like to basically use my scientific knowledge, because it's like the last people he worked with was Caitlin and Cisco, and he's like honestly bringing up the fact is he missed them. I was like, that's kind of interesting. I mean, because they are very smart people, so I was like, I guess that kind of makes sense. But then Ray's kind of bringing up the fact is like, you don't act like you're, you know, because like Eobard's like, oh, you don't really know the whole story, that there's more to it than that. He's like, the fact of the matter is you killed Barry's mom twice. You kill Rex Tyler, so like it's like, is there a complexity with that? And for him, he's like bringing up the fact is that, look at you, Raymond, and like there's nothing wrong with wanting more from life. It's, you know, he's like, especially in your pathetic case, it's like you could use your dwarf star the dwarf star that you're using to power your suit. Yeah, you want to be a hero and help people and everything, but you could also help people by using that dwarf star to power an entire city. But rather, you're using it to be a hero, because there's nothing wrong with wanting to be more, to do more with your life. And so I guess Eobard's kind of make himself seem very similar in the sense of like, hey, I am, you know, I just want more. I mean, like I said, granted, we still don't 100% know everything there is to know about Eobard, especially just like 100% of why he hates Barry so much in the future. So it was just kind of interesting seeing those particular characters bond. I mean, but I guess it makes sense because they are very smart people. But I mean, he brought up the fact is that obviously he is doing this because he's trying to run from his existence. Obviously, if you didn't listen to the Flash portion, I did bring up what went down in this week's episode, and I was like wondering how that would affect Legends, I did bring up the fact is I think what went down in the Flash already happened before the Zoom time wraith thing caught up with him a couple episodes back. That, like, because, you know, things that are happening in the Flash and Arrow and stuff like that already exist and already happened. Like, for example, the whole Flashpoint thing has already happened. Even, like, during the events of last season, like, technically it had already happened. So, to a certain extent, you know, it gets fuzzy, you know, time travel works like that and everything. So, that's why I'm thinking, like, maybe it died in the Flash episode in the past, but then kind of, like, things got rejiggered and it was kind of brought back to go after Eobard like it is, like it was revived or whatever the case may be. No point in diving too deeply into it. So, but nevertheless, I like just the fact is like when he kind of escapes later on in the episode, which you can expect it to. He, like I said, he did help out because it's a situation where Eobard needs them. It's like, oh, when they're returning to Earth and everything, it's like, yeah, Eobard needs them because it's like without them, he'll be stuck where he is. Or there's no because he wants to live just as much as anyone else. That's why he's doing all this so that he can reinstate his existence, so he doesn't have to be on the run and run away from his ultimate death because, you know, being wiped from time and existence. There's an interesting conversation to like raise like, okay, so the fact is you're running out of time, so you can either try and search the ship for the last piece of the spear, or you can just leave now. He's like, oh, until we meet again, Raymond, which is like, I'm very interested to see what happens when they kind of clash going forward. I'm sure he gave Ray some things to think about when it came to that whole conversation of like, you know, I guess basically trying to say that they're not that different. That they just both wanted more of their life. Just be like Eobard wanted to be like either like the Flash or someone or the Flash himself, you know, because like I brought up in the past his own reasoning for doing what he's doing, either because it's like he found out about his future, which is kind of like a heavy concept to deal with, you know, the Legends, like never a good thing to know your future. That, you know, one storyline I think I brought this up multiple times, but I'll reiterate it here, is that Eobard found out his future of becoming a villain, so he, rather than wanting to change it, he just accepted it. Or it was a situation where he knew he could never be the Flash, so he's like, I'll do the next best thing and be someone better and stronger and faster than the Flash. So it does beg the question of like, if you had to compare the two, who hates Barry more, Eobard or Savitar? I want to say probably Savitar because I think Savitar is the one that was locked up and everything. But I mean, granted, we still don't know exactly what he did to piss Eobard off so much to the point he wanted to go back in time and kill Barry's mom just for the sake of, I mean, more so than anything, it was meant to. He's trying to kill a younger Barry. No, he wants Barry to suffer. So I'm pretty sure, I could be remembering that wrong, but I'm pretty sure going after his mom was the exact reason. But nevertheless, little quick note, some stuff dealing with, obviously you had Stein, Mick, as well as Jack stay behind on the ground to kind of keep things okay back at the command center. What, for one, I love the fact is that, like, they're pretending to be British, and you have Jax, putting on a British accent, and obviously Stein too. I'm not sure about the actor who plays Stein, but definitely I brought up before, like especially I think I brought it up last season when I found out. But the actor who plays Jax is British, so he dropped his fake accent to put on his real accent for the show. I just like you really wouldn't know that. Like it's just kind of like I don't know whether I think that's the reason why they did it. Just feel like you know. It was just like a little touch that, like, because I know that now, like, you know, because I've known that for a while, I really appreciate it. I was like, that's so cool. But nevertheless, I'm surprised, like, I was kind of expecting Stein to bring up something, be like, I mean, he did kind of look at Jax when Jax started doing it, so I was like, but that was part of it, I expect him, like, I didn't know you could do that. He's like, yeah, I've been working on it, or something like that. Halfway expecting that. But I love it when the fact is that he's supposed to distract everyone, he starts singing, obviously for copyright reasons, I won't sing the song, even for the sake of just this. I just don't want to take the chances, you know? But, I was just like, it put me in the mood. It's just him busting in a song like that, distracting everyone. And it got me in a good mood too, to the point he was like getting Mick to sing it too. And even I was singing along. I was like, And I love how most people are just staring at them. But they're like, if you look at the scene, there is at least one guy kind of going like, yeah, almost getting into it. I halfway expected everyone to bust in the song too, but it's like, no, it's just him. An interesting thing is, I didn't know this, previously in a, episode where the, Legends originally met the JSA, obviously there was that whole Nazi mission that they went on, and basically in the bar, you have or club or whatever it was, you had Stein singing. I did not know this until like I think it was like at the time, obviously, superhero roundup. They brought I think it was Matt or whatever brought up the fact is that the actor who plays Stein is classically trained in music. I think when it comes to like opera or whatever the case may be. So I didn't know that at the time. It wasn't until afterwards. So I mean, I appreciated it then, but at the time I forgot to comment on it, and it's just like I felt like I might as well give him props. It's like, yo, you're very good, and it's just like, like I said, it's very infectious. I even love the fact is they played the. I try to avoid it because they kind of caught me off guard. I was like, oh, why are they playing like the previews to the next episode so early? Just because they did that little thing at the end, kind of like replaying it a little bit. I was like, I appreciate you doing that, and just put me in a good mood. You even have Mick commenting on it, but like, nice voice, Professor. So I'm guessing just kind of adding more to the fact is that it just showed you just very impressive. Just all I've got to say. Another thing in this episode is Rip trying to find his place amongst the team, because it's like, as we brought up last episode, I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting to see where that goes. Like the whole little thing of him and Sarah kind of talking to Gideon at the same time when she said captain. And it's like, oh yeah, they're both all the captain. And throughout the episode, you have him trying to, before he comes up with an idea or something, Sarah quickly comes and just kind of steals his thunder, and he's just kind of like, oh, okay. Because even at one point, Commander Steele, Henry, Nate's grandfather, comments on the fact that he's like, oh man, look at the legends. Like, I gotta admit, they used to, like, when I first met him, you were just a bunch of babbling, just going back and forth numbskulls, but now it's like you're the well-oiled machine. But then you had Rip being like, yeah, that's not thanks to me, which is kind of like, a little begrudging, because he even admits it to Sarah later on. He's like, it's not the fact is that she's captain. He's fine with that. What makes it kind of hard for him is the fact is that she's a better captain he ever was. Like, obviously he couldn't get the legends to 100% cooperate. Obviously here and there, but it's like they're more of a well-oiled machine now, more so than ever, because of Sarah's guidance. I mean, because truth be told is like, Rip didn't know anything about being a leader. Like I said, he wasn't very leadership material, like at the time he formed the Legends last season. It's a situation where he's just kind of like, I don't know where I fit in. And then Sarah's like, oh, well, it sounds like you're an outcast, a misfit. It's like, if the exact definition of a legend. So it's like he might not be captain anymore, which is, it's not even a situation of like, oh, like you got to be, he's not wanting to be captain again, because it's a little hard, just because he doesn't know where he fit in now, especially just after everything that's happened. So I did just like that conversation of, obviously, like, they're protecting the part of the shuttle that has the two astronauts that are knocked out, and Sarah's using the ship rather than destroying the asteroids that are about him. It's like, Rip's like, okay, you could use that, like, blast those asteroids or whatever. She's like, no, I can't. Like, it's better us to take the blow rather than the ships. And then the fact is that, you have Rip being like, oh, well, the fact of the matter is, she's like, well, you did this before when you stopped. You basically had the ship block an atomic bomb. He's like, well, at least then I had the decency to fly you off to different points in time. She's like, decency? You sent me to a time period where I was about to be hanged for being a witch. Just that back and forth. I loved it. Just the joking, loving animosity is what I appreciated. So. And I also thought it was kind of interesting why, I'm kind of trailing it back because it deals with the other point I want to bring up about the episode, is that the reason why Henry punched Rip. You find out the reason why. I figured it had to be this reason, but it's basically like, hey, he's been living there for like 5 years, and that basically meant having to leave his family behind, because he thought when he sees Rip, it's like he thought that when Rip came back for him, it meant he could go back to his original time. But it's like, no, it's a situation where he basically being on this path meant leaving his family behind and never going back. It's something that, he held a little animosity towards Rip for, because it's like, I gave up my family and everything for you. I mean, but then he's like, well, no, it was me who made that choice. Just at that time, it's like, it's a situation where duty came before family, which he heavily regretted. But also because he blamed Rip, because it's like, oh, how can Rip ask me to sacrifice my family when he has a family of his own? Which is like, how does he know? Like, where did that conversation come up? I guess at some point before he left, he ended up finding out about Rip's past, maybe while he was on the ship. Maybe Gideon kind of let something slip. I'm not even sure. But it's like, how did you find out about him having a family? But, Nate kind of explained it. Like, it's like he was told about Rip's situation. It's like, Rip knows more so than anything about, like, Rip knows more so than anyone what it means to kind of be in a situation where it's like you want to be with your family, but you can. Because what it ties into is the fact is that, Nate and him have this whole conversation about the fact is that, Henry's like, he's mad because he won't be able to be there for his son. His son and wife will think he just up and abandoned him. But for Nate, because Nate brings up the fact is that, he's like, me and Hank. He's like, I call my dad by his name. He's just like, me and Hank don't get along. He's like, it's kind of interesting. I would like to know what it'd be like. Would Hank be the same guy he is if you had been there to raise him? Which kind of gets, Henry thinking like, oh, why not just take me back to the original time? That way it'd be like I never left, and that way you can have a better life. Which Nate tells that to Amaya, which Amaya's like, you can't do that because that'll mean changing your destiny. Like, the fact is that everything that happened has led to you being who you are right now. And it's like, change even the slightest thing in history and it could have big effects. Obviously, that's the whole point of what the legends are. It's like, as a historian as well as a legend, you know that more so than anyone. Like, just how even the smallest thing can have such a vast effect. So Maya tells Henry the truth, which Henry is like, oh, you can't take me back. He's like, I can't risk the chance of it might changing things about you, because it might make it so that Nate was never born, which would basically undo like everything that's happened this season, because it would be like, oh, since Nate was never even born or followed the path of becoming a historian or whatever, he might end up being like our carpenter for all you know. It's a situation because he doesn't follow that same passion and love for history that basically he never ends up in that situation where he's with Oliver to go track down the Wave Rider, and just everyone's just forever stuck in those different points in time. So, which obviously Nate holds animosity towards Amaya for, which he kind of blabs about her future, which he apologizes for later on. But it's a situation of like, it's like, how can you, like, if you know your future, would you really be so willing to tell me that I should give up on my family? It's like, my family should come first before history, essentially. But, kind of bringing up the fact is, one person shouldn't know too much about their own future, which we have Amaya looking into it at the end of the episode, which Gideon's like, I warn you not to do that, but she does, and she finds out about her granddaughter and everything. So, very interested to see what she decides to do with that. Like, knowing the future is not a good thing, kind of tying in with it. I mean, obviously this episode heavily tied in with the Flash, as I brought up in the Flash part as well. Is the fact is that obviously it deals with sacrifice, because you have Jay sacrificing himself on the Flash, and in this episode you have Henry sacrificing himself to make sure that they're able to get back to Earth. But it's like, we see what knowing the future has done to Barry. It's like, what will it do to Amaya? And the fact of the matter is, she wants to change things, but who's to say, like, as Ray brought up, is like, what if her granddaughter doesn't become Vixen later on? All the people she saves as Vixen, all that kind of gets erased and everything. So, what will Amaya do? Like, it's a situation where it's like, does family come first or does duty come first? Which she's always been trained to believe that duties come first. But in the situation she's in now with the Legends, she kind of sees things a lot differently. She sees things as like, fraternizing with your coworkers and stuff like that, essentially, kind of putting it a different way. So, definitely interested to see what happens between her and Nate, but also what she decides to do with her knowledge of the future. It can't be the easiest thing. I mean, definitely it's not the easiest thing to know all that. So, I'm very interested to find out where we go from here, because obviously the team has 2 pieces of the Spear of Destiny, and then also the Legion of Doom has 2 pieces of the Spear of Destiny, and where this is all going to take them going forward. A little final note I just want to tack on at the very end. I love the fact is that you, kind of going back to it, I completely forgot to add this earlier, was to talk about Ray and Eobard. One more thing. Obviously, for one, Ray walking on the moon was pretty badass, but also just the fact that they're like, oh, where's Eobard? He's like, oh yeah, he's tied up. And then a tied up Eobard is like, puns? Really? Puns are the lowest form of comedy. It's just like, I feel like you get, I don't know, like you got a little peek at Eobard's personality when he was pretending to be Wells, but now I feel, I mean, granted, it's kind of hard to say because obviously that was Tom Cavanaugh playing that version of him, but now you have like, a different actor kind of adding his own taste of who Eobard is and just kind of being a smartass like that. I really appreciate that. That's just kind of the same thing as like Dark and Malcolm, because you get to see a little bit of more of their personality, a different side of their personalities kind of shine through. That's what I love about this whole Legion of Doom situation. So it's just a beautiful thing in the way it's constructed. That's the last thing I want to tack on at the end. So just a thought that I was going to bring up earlier. Once again, because I tend to think about talking about something, but then I kind of completely forget about it and have to bring it up at the last minute. Sometimes I don't even find out I wanted to talk about that until I've already started editing these, and I'm like, right, I meant to talk about that. It's I'm too lazy to go back and add that now. So, but nevertheless, that's just going off on another tangent. But that's really all I want to talk about in this episode. Be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.